This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Europe finally calls the persecution of Middle East Christians a genocide. Also, more than 1 million Middle Eastern refugees have flooded into Europe. Now Americans debate whether they should let them come to the United States. Plus, diamonds are a girl's best friend. Find out how Israel has become a global player in the diamond industry. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. The European Parliament has declared the slaughter of Christians and other religious minorities by ISIS a genocide. In an historic move, the Parliament passed a resolution calling the atrocities by the Islamic terror group crimes against humanity. George Thomas has that story.
Members of the European Parliament say that what the Islamic terror group ISIS is doing to Christians and other religious minorities in Syria and Iraq amounts to war crimes and genocide.
It's very important to call it genocide. It's important because it's the truth.
Nina Shea is with Freedom House. Her group has been documenting ISIS atrocities.
In the ISIS-controlled territory, there is no evidence right now of any Christian life. All the Christians have either been killed or driven out. The Yazidis, thousands of them, their women are now sex slaves.
The resolution by the European Parliament says those who intentionally commit atrocities for religious or ethnic reasons must be charged with crimes against humanity.
And if we take this solemn vow of never again, as we have since the Jewish Holocaust under the Nazis, we have to call it as such for the Christians.
Former Congressman Frank Wolf, who has for decades given voice to persecuted Christians around the world, welcomed the unanimous vote, saying it finally recognizes the pain and suffering of those living under constant ISIS threat.
To call it genocide would honor those who have been the subject of genocide, so we remember.
The plight of Middle East Christians is sobering. In Syria, the number of believers has plummeted from 1.2 million to less than 500,000. In neighboring Iraq, roughly two-thirds of that country's 1.5 million Christians have either been killed or forced to flee by ISIS. Shea is now calling on the White House to follow the European Parliament's example and label what's happening to Christians in the Middle East as genocide.
There's a reluctance on the part of the administration to call it genocide against Christians. They have told us privately that they will call it genocide against Yazidis, but not Christians.
On the other hand, Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton has already said that ISIS is committing genocide. During a New Hampshire town hall in late December, Clinton says she was initially reluctant to use the word since it requires countries to take specific action to stop the genocide. Now, she's convinced otherwise.
I am sure now we have enough evidence. What is happening is genocide, deliberately aimed at destroying not only the lives, but wiping out the existence of Christians and other religious minorities in the Middle East in territory controlled by ISIS.
The European Parliament resolution calls on the International Criminal Court to begin investigating violations by ISIS against Christians, Yazidis, and other religious minorities. George Thomas, CBN News.
During the U.S. presidential campaign, different topics have taken center stage. One of the hottest debates has been over the issue of immigration. President Obama wants to bring in more Syrian refugees, but that's facing serious pushback because some are concerned the United States would be importing terrorism. Dale Hurd reports on the potential intersection of immigration and Islam.
As Europe's winter closes in on Syrian refugees, many find themselves out in the cold.
The weather is cold. Please help.
As America prepares to accept some of them, many are asking which of them are true refugees. What is America's role, if any, in helping them? And how many of them are ISIS?
I take ISIS at its word when it says we want to exploit the refugee program to infiltrate the West.
President Obama says Syrian refugees are less dangerous than tourists, and he wants to bring in at least 10,000 in 2016. But warning signs abound. The Germans say almost 1 out of 3 migrants are lying about being Syrian. The Czech president has warned that Europe is facing an organized invasion and not the spontaneous movement of refugees. One young refugee told this Swiss newspaper he met many radical Muslims on his way to Europe. And FBI Director James Comey has warned Congress that Syrian refugees cannot be properly vetted.
It's not just those who come in here who specifically intend to be part of plots to kill Americans. It's also those who may be most easily recruitable in the years to come.
Clifford May, president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, says it would only take a few terrorists to get through.
There were only a handful of people involved in the 9/11 attacks. Just a handful. Is that okay? Are we willing to have a 9/11 attack every 1 year, every 3 years, every 5 years?
Presidential candidate Donald Trump has called for a temporary ban on all Muslim immigration. But when you actually crunch the numbers, those who have gone through the actual refugee vetting process have so far committed no acts of terrorism on American soil.
There have been no refugees admitted since 9/11 who have committed a terrorist attack in the United States.
Immigration policy analyst Alex Nelrasta says Syrian refugees in America would not come through Europe, but from camps in the Middle East. And very few would-be terrorists could make it through the refugee process.
The first level of checks to the refugee system is done by the UN, where they reject 99% of applicants. There are an additional 21 different steps undertaken by the U.S. government that a refugee must go through in order to come to the United States. For a Syrian, that takes about 3 years to go through to come here. So it's a very safe system. It is the hardest way to come to the United States.
There are easier ways for a terrorist to enter the U.S., like green card fraud or a student visa, or simply walking across the border. But what this debate seems to really be about is the religion of the refugees, Islam, and if Islam makes them a potential danger. President Obama, who continues to have trouble saying the words Muslim terrorism, seems to view Islam as the same as other religions. But many former Muslims disagree.
Is it? Is it the same as other religions?
No, it's not. Islam is different than other religions because Islam does not accept any law besides Allah's law.
We asked Brother Rashid, a former Muslim who now hosts a popular Arabic TV program called Daring Questions, if some Muslim migrants are coming to the West not as guests, but as conquerors.
Of course. I have family members in Europe and they think the same thing. I visited them and they think that they hate Europe, they hate the West, they hate their way of life, so they are there to change them.
Brother Rashid says he does not believe, as some do, that every Muslim is a potential terrorist, because he says many Muslims are not serious about their faith. But he warns that all a Muslim needs to do, like the San Bernardino bomber, is suddenly decide to follow the Quran completely. He says that is precisely what ISIS has tried to do.
These guys are devout Muslims. They are not just a bunch of terrorists who did not understand Islam. All these guys understood Islam, studied it. Al-Baghdadi, the head of ISIS, is a PhD holder in Islamic studies, so he must understand Islam to get a PhD.
There are more concerns about Muslim refugees. Polls show most Muslim countries are overwhelmingly anti-Semitic. One survey found that almost 80% of Syrians support the Palestinian terror group Hamas. Polls show most Americans overwhelmingly oppose accepting Syrian refugees, and over 30 states have refused to accept them. America is not only a land of immigrants, it is the most charitable nation on earth. But when it comes to allowing in some Muslim refugees, Americans may be forced to choose between charity and safety. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Coming up, an up-to-date look at the status of the Islamic State, where they're winning and losing. Many wonder how the battle against ISIS is going. We talk with Middle East expert Jonathan Spire, who just came back from the front lines of the war. He gave us a report that's a combination of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Jonathan Spire, great to see you again here on Jerusalem Dateline, and glad you're back safely from Syria and in Iraq.
Thank you very much, Chris. Nice to be here.
Can you tell us what your experiences was there in Syria just a few weeks ago?
Yeah, well, we were really there to try to research a new military alliance called Syrian Democratic Forces, which is the alliance which is currently allied with United States air power in the fight against Islamic State.
So how would you describe the state of the Islamic State right now inside Syria?
Well, the Islamic State is certainly, still in existence and is nowhere close to being destroyed. Having said that, it is no longer expanding. ISIS have a central slogan, which is Baqiya wa tatamaddad in Arabic, which means remaining and expanding. As of now, I would say the Islamic State is remaining, but it's not only no longer expanding, but it is in fact contracting. ISIS have lost a town called Al-Hawl, which enabled the SDF guys to cut Highway 47 between Raqqa and Mosul. They just lost the Tishreen Bridge across the Euphrates River. It sounds like a small detail, but it's important because it was the last bridge across that river that ISIS controls, which means if they wanted to bring forces quickly from further west, from Aleppo province to Raqqa city, to defend it, it would now take them about twice or 2.5 times as long as it took them before they lost that bridge in December 27th. So the sense is, they're losing ground. In terms of their internal arrangements of the Islamic State, still pretty much intact. ISIS rules with an iron hand in those areas. All chance of dissent, is immediately punished in the most brutal of ways. So there's no sense of ISIS facing a challenge from within anytime soon. But at the same time, fewer foreign volunteers. The flow of foreign volunteers is still coming, but much less than before, considerably less than before. There's a shortage of money. They just reduced the salaries given to fighters, was an indication of that. They, in November, announced an amnesty for ISIS fighters who had deserted. Again, an indication, we think, of a shortage of manpower there for ISIS. So generally the trend lines are not good, but it doesn't mean that ISIS is anywhere close to disappearing anytime soon, but it is weakening.
So they're retreating, they're contracting, but do they still represent a danger to the region and to the West?
Well, I think they do, because what's happening is that, in a similar way with Al-Qaeda actually, is that as they lose their territorial holdings, so the focus begins to be more on going into the business of international terrorism. And we can trace that in 2015. If we think of 2014 as being the great period of expansion for ISIS in Iraq and Syria, then they were very busy, expanding on the ground in those countries. But in 2015, when the general trend has been toward contraction, so we've also witnessed the emergence of ISIS as a threat on a global terror level. First of all, in the bombings in Suruc and then in Ankara in Turkey. Then, of course, the taking down of the Russian jet over Sinai in October. And, of course, also the terror attacks in Paris in November. So the sense is, as ISIS loses ground, so it has to maintain somehow that sense of momentum on which it depends both for recruitment and for financial contributions. And the way that it's doing that is by going into the business of international terrorism. This is firstly. Secondly, we shouldn't forget that ISIS is a franchise organization. There are branches, or provinces as they like to call them, of the Islamic State elsewhere, not territorially linked to the mothership, so to speak, in Iraq and Syria. And here we do still see continued advancement. The ISIS holding around Sirte in Libya, of increasing importance. ISIS has a province in northern Sinai engaged in insurgency against Egyptian forces there. ISIS has an additional branch in southwest Syria, adjoining the border with the Israeli Golan Heights. So again, international terrorism and also the support for franchises. In this respect, the curve line is still in the upwards direction from the Islamic State's point of view.
Well, Jonathan, thanks for your expertise and your experience here and giving us some insight into what's happening here.
Thanks very much, Chris.
Up next, a new film tells the story of the resurrection through the eyes of a Roman soldier. In just a few weeks, millions of Christians around the world will celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That resurrection took place not too far from where I'm standing right now. A new film called Risen tells that story through the eyes of a Roman soldier who doesn't believe. He's also out to disprove the disciples of Jesus. Ephraim Graham sat down with the star of the film, who calls the story the greatest murder mystery ever written.
Risen is a masterful murder mystery. It's the resurrection story through the eyes of an unbeliever. British actor Joseph Fiennes plays Clavius, a man of war and death.
A big attraction for me was the way his mind worked, but what I found, to get to his mind, I found that I had to take a physical route. I went to gladiator school in Rome. And
how long did you stay in Clavius?
I stayed long enough to never want to go back. No, I spent a good part of a week working with a brilliant set of guys, and what I learned from a military standpoint, really for me, was the way into the way the man was conditioned and the way that he thought.
Clavius is an ambitious Roman soldier who first tries to prevent Christ's body from being stolen after his crucifixion. Then he sets out on an angry journey to find the body after it disappears from the sealed and guarded tomb. He's a bit of a detective.
It's beyond us.
Spare me the riddles and zealot babble. Where did you take Yeshua? Is he a goblin? A sprite? Alive again somehow?
Open your heart and see.
I see delusion.
It doesn't matter.
A martyr?
No.
Then give me the others and I'll grant you freedom.
I'm already free.
I know it was a physical journey for you. Was it also emotional?
Yes, it was emotional. We had a wonderful team of actors, and they were all very present and dedicated to the narrative. And it was all like any great narrative and any great movie. It's about relationships, and you know, I think your average good actor gets that and knows it and preps accordingly. So the disciples as a group of actors were incredibly bonded. They were a unit and a family. And I was very much polarized and outside of that. Mm-hmm. But when I got invited into the group, it was kind of like the arc of the film was pretty much the arc of my existence with them. I wouldn't have contact with them until we had kind of made those scenes where I had contact. So that became quite emotional, that journey.
Director Kevin Reynolds shot the film in Spain and Malta, where Fiennes also had no contact with the actor who played Christ until their first scenes together.
I don't know what to believe anymore.
Did you find yourself connecting with Clavius a lot?
I did. You know, filming's lonely. He's a lonely character. I think for me, he, you know, we all want a second chance. And I think that's the really interesting component, is that I think deep down, especially in regards to putting Yeshua to death or being present and ordering his death or being part of that squad, that deep down he wants a second chance, and part of that second chance is forgiveness. So he's really searching for something, and the answer is in this new cause. And I guess, you know, through lives, we all make mistakes, and we're always looking for that second chance. So I think a big component in the movie for me, and what I connect to with Clavius, is the sense of the second chance, even if it's something subconscious within him that hasn't quite bubbled to the surface or he's worked out. So I love that component.
That second chance is exactly why Christ suffered, died, and was risen. Ephraim Gray, CBN News.
Coming up, are diamonds really a girl's best friend? A look into one of Israel's biggest industries, diamonds. Israel is best known for its biblical history, cutting-edge technology, and an outstanding military. But you may not know it's also a world leader in diamonds. CBN News Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has that story.
You may have heard that diamonds are a girl's best friend, but what you might not know is that a lot of those diamonds come from Israel.
The Israel Diamond Exchange has the largest trading floor in the world. Some say it's like shopping in a diamond supermarket.
Israelis have a very special knack in being able to run around the world and are very, in the most positive way possible, aggressively pursue business. And you see Israelis in New York all the time. You see Israelis in the Far East. And it's become a very important hub for global distribution of diamonds.
David Lasher is managing director of New York's Diamond Dealers Club.
New York is the bedrock of the world diamond industry. You know, over 40% of the world's diamonds are consumed by the U.S. Israel is a very important partner in moving the goods through the world and to the U.S.
The Israel Diamond Exchange boasts some 3,500 members. Shmuel Schnitzer is the lifelong honorary president of the Israel Diamond Exchange.
It's not easy to become a member here. You have to show your credibility in all aspects.
Oddly enough, the diamond connection began in Europe because it was one of the few trades allowed to Jews. As Jews returned to the Holy Land, they brought their knowledge with them.
It started in the 40s when Jews that ran away from Europe came to Israel, and they built the industry here. Since then, thanks God, we are growing and growing. In 1940, we had 70,000 US dollars exports. Today, we have about $7 billion only for polished diamond export.
There are no diamond mines in Israel. All of its gems are traded, cut, and polished. Israel does not deal in conflict diamonds, the stones that are sold to finance civil war and bloodshed in Africa. Even today, the industry is very family-oriented, passing the business from generation to generation.
We are a family. My father is a diamond manufacturer for 50 years. Yeah, and for 50 years we manufacture diamonds. Myself inside the business, I'm making diamond jewelry.
And it's possible to spend a lot.
This product, it's around $200,000. I have $150,000 to $200,000. The people that can buy this is or a wholesaler or a jewelry factory.
But why are diamonds so enduring? Schnitzer says it's the combination of women's love for diamonds and their lasting value. That could be why diamonds are forever. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Israel Diamond Exchange, Tel Aviv, Israel.
In case you're wondering, they didn't give Julie any samples. That's it for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, throughout the week, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.